Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for and the other members of the archives for inviting me to come and share the story of Alabama gold. And thank you for coming and having lunch and learning a little bit more about the hidden history of Alabama. Alabama gold is sort of a phrase that's not familiar to too many people. I've had very few people say, oh, yes, I know about Alabama gold. Usually they say, well, I didn't know there was gold in Alabama. And it is a topic that has fascinated me, and the more I have learned about it, which I've researched over the years, the more I realize the significance of the gold mining in Alabama. So we'll get started. It lasts 1830 through 1937, not continuous, but throughout those years, different periods. Where was the gold? Where did it come from? Well, it didn't start in Alabama, obviously. Gold mining started in the southern Piedmont in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson recorded the first discovery of gold near his farm. And it wasn't a big operation, but it comes on down to North Carolina, where there was a tremendous gold strike on the Reed farm, and people became extremely excited, and they dug up their farmland, and some did find quite a lot of gold. But this is not our story. I just want to put a background to it so that you understand where that gold came from. And then in Georgia, Dahlonega is the site of where there was a big discovery of gold by Benjamin Parks in 1828. And they have a museum, and many of you probably have been there. There's also one at Villarica, which the gold was discovered there about the same time. Well, let's move into Alabama on the Villarica Plateau. And we find that there are some important points there to recognize, and one is that the gold in Georgia was under the land that belonged to the Creek Indians, to the Cherokee Indians. In Alabama, it was under the land that belonged to the Creek Indians, and that was a very unfortunate situation for our Native Americans. And that story has been told better than I could tell it, of the Indian removal and the Indians going to the west and the land being taken over by settlers and miners. And most people know that story about the settlers, but a lot of people don't know about the miners who came in at the same time. Looking at that little pink segment of the map, would you keep that in mind, please? Now, this is the segment of the state that's called the Gold Belt. Does it look a little bit like that? So, George Adams, one of the early geologists, stated that the gold mining in Alabama, he thought that it contributed to the agitation for the removal of Indians. And of course, that's not something that's been proven, and that was suggested by him and by others who wrote about that period of time. In the Gold Belt, there are 9 counties, and we are located with it all around us, and those are Cleburne, Coosa, Chambers, Clay, Chilton, Elmore, Randolph, Talladega, and Tallapoosa. And that map came from a Geological Survey, and it shows the 3,500 square mile triangle where all of this gold mining was taking part. Now, I really need to start feeling excited about this and with a tone of excitement because there was a tremendous amount of excitement going on in the Southeast in this period of time. If you think about all those movies and stories, and myths that you have heard about the Wild West, well, all that was taking place in the Southeast before it did in California. There were there was a hostile environment. People lived among Indians who didn't want them there. There were all types of characters that were there, investors, miners, farmers, a few outright crooks and villains. So all of this got its start in the southeastern states and in Alabama, which was where the last discovery of gold was in the southeastern states was made. So that was not diminished by the fact that it happened around here, and it happened first. How long was that before? If you say, okay, in Alabama, gold was discovered about 1830, which would have been, the geologists are estimating, because the gold was discovered in Georgia in 1828. Therefore, you would think that miners would want to come on across the plateau into Alabama and find gold here, which they did. Well, who discovered gold in Alabama first? That's the question that might occur to people about this topic. Well, excuse me, in 1830, the nephew and namesake of Alabama's first governor, William Y. Bibb, and his father-in-law, Todd Robinson, made the first authenticated discovery of gold. And it was authenticated by being reported in the Niles Weekly Register in spring 1831. Like a lot of gold miners, they didn't stay with it very long. They decided that farming was a much better investment of their time. There were in Alabama, believe it or not, gold rushes. There were two that we know about. Very little was recorded in history. If it were not for those geological reports, I'm not sure that I would have been able to write the book. In fact, I'm quite sure I would not have. The first gold rush occurred at Arbacoochee, 1835, 1836. Thousands of miners came in. If you can imagine, think of a little backwoods crossroads. It's not hard to do in Alabama. And overnight, thousands of people are rushing in with their tools and their tents. And the rush resulted in a town or a camp of about 5,000 miners, businessmen and investors. Mining, of course, was the hub of the community's economy, and the companies paid from 75 cents to $1.75 per day. And that money was spent in local establishments, such as mining supply stores, gambling houses, hotels, saloons, and brothels. Then the second gold strike occurred in northeast Tallapoosa County, 1842 to 1845. And again, thousands of miners flooded in to the areas, and there were 3,000 to 3,500 miners that have been estimated, lived in temporary dwellings. They often pitched their tents near their sites so they could mine day and night by lanterns. In this town, there were 14 stores, 2 hotels, saloons, and a pit for cockfighting. And it was said that the post office in Goldville was larger, busier than the one in Montgomery. And this all came to a quick end when in 1849 the cry of gold came up from California, and the people out there could walk around and pick up gold on the ground. It lasted for a little while. The land rushes the gold rushes created land rushes. Obviously, people wanted to come in and buy a piece of territory, and this was an opportunity for some of the people who were not quite honest in their dealings, and they had a couple of methods of increasing the value, seemingly increase the value of a property that they might have for sale. Some shot ore into rock crevices, others salted nuggets on the ground to enhance the value of the land. And these people that were rushing in, suffering with gold fever and ready to grab a piece of that land and be wealthy overnight, they paid the price, which was often very inflated, and they were really buying land. Gold mining stories from the antebellum years. And we all love the old stories out of the West, I guess. I always did. Grew up watching Westerns and hearing about them. In Cleburne County, a miner struck it rich at a site he was mining, and he cleaned over 11 pounds of gold. And that evening he celebrated, I can imagine, with great gusto. And a fight broke out, and he was killed in that fight. And he never got to enjoy the wealth. And that night also, a heavy rain came and washed away any evidence of his site. In 1840, another interesting little story occurred in northeast Tallapoosa County. Dr. Ulrich, who was a German doctor, decided he wanted to set up a wine orchard, a winery, and sell wine. And at that time, I suppose that was a good business, but when he dug into the hillside, he discovered a gold vein, which was much more interesting and promising, and he abandoned the idea of growing grapes and built a stamp mill, and it was powered with water from the Hillaby Creek to process the ore. If anybody has any knowledge of gold mining, you know the water is actually as important as the ore because you can't separate without the water. Local people mistook Ulrich to be Dutch and named the site Dutch Bend. It was in a sharp curve in the Hillaby Creek. And some of you may or may not have heard of Dutch Bend. And the Russell family at one time owned Dutch Bend and did a little bit of mining up there, but it was not one of the big mining projects. He had the gold made into small 1-ounce bars, and he used that locally to purchase supplies and other staples. And if you could imagine at that time, there was no tax on gold. Nobody had to report anything. And there was really not much of a way for people to keep up with what other people were doing. So there was a great deal of gold, probably more was not reported than it was. This is an interesting story out of Tallapoosa County, southern Tallapoosa County, that when all of these miners picked up and went to California, among them was James Dowd Phillips, who lived down at Wind Creek. And he took 2 men, probably relatives or workmen, with him to work in the gold fields. Now, you may, like I did, have the idea, here they go in these wagons and horses across the plains, and a lot of them did, but the most used travel route to California in 1849 was by ship through Panama. But by late 1849, the departures became limited due to crews abandoning the ships. Once they got to California, the crews would abandon the ships and go join the diggers. This left hundreds of ships stranded. So it was also a period of time where cholera was rampant. During this 3-year mining venture, you remember this is the southern Tallapoosa resident, James Dowd Phillips, he achieved substantial success. When he returned to Tallapoosa County, he acquired a 300-acre Wind Creek place, a 600-acre plantation, land in Clay County, and a townhome with several lots in Dadeville on Lafayette Street. He and Sarah had 5 daughters, 2 sons, one of which was named Charles, California. In southern Tallapoosa County, there were several gold mining sites, but they were on the same gold vein system, which was 3 miles long and in places 100 feet wide. The elevated line was called the Devil's Backbone. Large amounts of alluvial gold was taken from Blue Hill Creek. The ore was of a fairly low grade with graphite, and that was very difficult to separate, to get the gold out. No great amounts of money came from that. And the Farrows Mines was also in the southern Tallapoosa County on the Devil's Backbone site. Well, if you wanted to make money, I'm not sure that gold mining was a way to do it. It was very difficult and hard work. The mines yielded gold, but to earn $1 a profit required spending 3, so it was not an industry that people pursued for a long time. This is a pick that was used by Mr. Farrow, Thomas T. Farrow, in digging in his gold mine. This is located in Tallapoosa Historical Museum in Dadeville, and if you're in that area, sometime stop by. They have very nice display of some of these tools and historical places. I have to give credit to Michael Toomey, who was Alabama's first geologist from 1848 to 1857. And he prepared the surveys and published reports in newspapers. And I don't think we can appreciate today, with all these newspapers and internet, instant news, and even the equipment and resources that a person has today, that back during that time, a person had to be very smart, very dedicated to fulfill their job as a geologist. And I will say again, without them, there would be no record, no history of Alabama gold. The gold is located in the Wedowee schist, and it was formed during the volcanic and tectonic activity hundreds of millions of years ago, at the same times that the Appalachian Mountains were formed. Deep within the mountains, there was an intermittent line of gold veins that extended as far south as the Appalachian foothills of east central counties in Alabama, including Talladega, Randolph, and Tallapoosa. In Tallapoosa County, the ore at Hog Mountain is located in the Hackneyville schist, where the primary rock is schist and the secondary is quartz. And this is what the blue quartz looks like. And this picture is made only a couple of years ago at Hog Mountain. In the early days, of course, they used gold mining pans, and this is an example of a pan they might have used. This is an example of some of the tools, a pick. They didn't have a lot of equipment. They had to really be dedicated and hardworking. Another geologist, E.A. Smith, in 1892, in inspecting, these geologists would go around and inspect these old sites, and they'd write reports and send them to the state geologists. And E.A. Smith, upon inspecting the Goldville area, said that it was pretty well run down, unkempt, ragged, and down at the hills. There wasn't anything much going on at Goldville. let's look at the significance of the southern gold mining industry. There were only a couple of historians that I was able to locate who wrote about gold mining in the South. One was Otis Young in an article, The Southern Gold Rush. He summarized the significance of the southern gold mining, and he stated the $40 million gold production of the South before 1861 appears comparatively minuscule, a whole order of magnitude less than the $550 to $680 million production estimated for California between 1848 and 1861. But that comparison does not take into account the impact upon the economy. From 1830 to 1879, Geological Survey state the value of gold mined in Alabama was $365,300. As we know, probably that much again, or maybe 2 or 3 times was actual amount that was recovered. But this was his comment that it gave a lot of promise that if people invested, that maybe that they would be able to gain wealth, and they did invest. They invested their time, they invested their money. The industry, gold mining industry, is of Southern origins. You'll not hear that, probably not heard that. But it introduced Americans to the idea of rushing for gold and to the techniques with which a hard-working man might, with a little luck, gain comfortable wealth. And that's an interesting perspective. We'll go back now to a graph to give you a visual of where these gold mines are located, and you keep in mind that chunk, that segment of land where those counties were. And this is Tallapoosa County, where more gold was recovered from than any other county. You see the Goldville, see if I could use this thing, the Goldville district right there, that was very active in the 1840s, but it was mined out and never really any significant amount of gold was brought from that again. However, here is the Devil's Backbone and the Eagle Creek districts, and the Devil's Backbone was the area that I was telling you about with Farrows Gold Mines and the Phillips. And it was active, but a lot of dreams, a lot of promises that never really profited the people that invested. But they had a lot of excitement, and today they get excited. You can talk about people about gold mining, and they can get really excited. But people forget that just because you find gold, it's not clear profit. It costs a lot to get it out of the ground. I saved the Hog Mountain. Let me find it right here. Here's Hog Mountain. I saved that one last because I was going to talk about it a little bit more. That is an area where there's continuous, not continuous, but more regular mining occurred because it was so rich. There are millions of tons of rock on Hog Mountain, and probably every one of them has some gold. But again, how do you get it out? It's not like you take a pan and go to the stream, although people in that area did pan for gold. But the big bulk of gold, the value of gold, came from Hog Mountain. Geologists have credited Hog Mountain with producing from 1/2 to 3/4 of the gold that has been found in Alabama. So that, if you take those numbers I gave you earlier and do that little bit of math, you can estimate the value there of that section. Lots of gold mining sites. In Alexander City, you start at Duncan and you go up through New Site, Goldville, Hog Mountain, and then there's a lot of those smaller mines that have been worked. This is Hog Mountain that I was talking about earlier. I grew up about 3 miles from this mountain, and I always had tremendous interest in the history of that area. And thankfully, I've been able to pursue that. There were 3 operations at Hog Mountain. The first one began with the discovery of gold by Mr. Johnson in 1839 and ended in 1849 as the miners rushed to California. Then in 1890, the T.H. Aldrich family purchased and operated the mine from 1890 to 1916 profitably. During that period of time, they introduced the use of cyanide processing, and that tripled the amount of gold that they were able to produce. But the mine closed in 1916 due to shortages in chemicals and labor because of World War I. And the third operation was during the Depression years. 1932, 1937, under the management Hog Mountain Mining and Milling Company. And it was still under the ownership of Aldrich, but it was leased to a P.S. Gardner. And they produced gold there, a good bit of gold. Here's a picture of the buildings. In fact, they produced regularly, it was known as the top gold mining produced mine in the state of Alabama. And in 1936, the mine produced enough gold to cause Alabama to be recognized as the top gold producing state in the Appalachian states. So that's pretty significant, I thought. Do you remember those states that I came down with at the beginning? This was a picture of the Hillaby Gold Mining Company in the early 1900s. And I thought this little carts there were pretty sophisticated looking for that period of time. These are stopes over the side that they used to stope up the walls when the dirt and rock would be insecure. This is the famous Hillaby Creek and Sandbar. It goes all the way back to the Hillaby Indians at the very beginning of any settlement in Tallapoosa County. But this is where the miners, when they were separating their ore from the gold from the ore, this is where they would take that and wash it out. And today, this is pretty much the same. If you look at this little map, you'll see the mine, this is 1930s. You see the 2 main veins, the Barren vein and the Blue vein. See the proximity to Hillaby Creek. It's only about a mile away, and as I had said, you had to have water. Water is just as important as the gold. And just as a quick summary here, if you'll look at this Alexander City newspaper, 1932, it sort of headlines what was going on at the time that the last operation of gold mining at Hog Mountain happened, and actually anywhere in Alabama of any significance. Russell Manufacturing was the biggest industry in Alexander City. That's gone. There was a brief summary of the New Deal, and we know that the price of gold went up during that time, and that inspired investors to open a gold mine, the old gold mines. The gold mine here to open by Christmas, and it began to employ with about 75 people and grew to about 200. But they only made they didn't make much more than people who worked in the mines in the early 1900s. It was 75 cents, $1, $1.25, $1.75. Drillers, a little more advanced work. So why did it close? If this was the top this was a mine that made the top producing state in the Appalachian states, why did it close? Well, that little right-hand column, it says brief summary of the New Deal benefits. Well, once the benefits went away, the New Deal created an increase in pay, and the investor says, no, we're not going to pay it. So the mine was closed. And that was the end of major gold mining attempts in Alabama. I have a lot more I could share with you, and a lot in the book. And I hope that you will buy a book and look at it. I'll be glad to sign it for you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to our speaker, Ms. Walls. If you have any questions, if you would please raise your hand, and either Georgia Ann or myself will pass you the microphone, because we're recording today's session for YouTube. Let's see, you'll be next.
Are you by any chance related to a Hallie Walls who used to live near the Bear Creek Swamp near Prattville?
No, but I love genealogy, and I'd like to know if I were. That's I'm a member of the DAR, and we kind of specialize in genealogy, and I'd like to know the answer to that too.
You're aware that the former governor lives at Goldville up there?
Yes.
And when I was a kid, we played in a lot of those old mines up around there.
Craig.
And it wasn't safe, but we went in them and dealt with the rattlesnakes and the copperheads. And once in a while we'd find a little flake of gold.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then I lived in Attic City, so we was on some of those Hillary Creek holes up there too.
I've heard people, they'll say, well, I've crawled in every hole on Hog Mountain. But as far as I know, no one ever got hurt. Even during they were during the operation, but only one person was killed. And that was because the truck loaded with the ore fell through the Sanford Bridge. And the second section of my book is about that 1930s operation.
Just north of Auburn and Lee County, there's a place called Gold Ridge or Gold Hill. Is that anything having to do with the gold?
Well, people always ask me that, and there is gold, in most areas that have the word gold in the name of the town. And I believe Randall Williams with New South is from that place, and he might know more about it than I do, but just because his gold is attached to a place doesn't mean it there is very much there. There was an Indian woman who, when her husband died, she inherited some land, and she decided she loved the word gold, and she loved the name Fanny. So she decided she would name her land Fanny Gold Mine. So that's, it's a possibility it was named to something of a similar origin. I've enjoyed that little story.
Are you aware of gold mines in Mobile County?
I grew up in Tallapoosa County, and my focus was there for two reasons. I did grow up in Tallapoosa County. I lived 3 miles from Hog Mountain. I grew up 3 miles from Hog Mountain. I had the pleasure of interviewing miners from the 1930s. It gave me a lot of information from that period of time. They were my parents' generation, and I enjoyed that tremendously, and I expanded that out. I'm going to answer your question. I expanded that out to the county, and from the county, I read the Geological Surveys. And beyond the Geological Surveys, I have not been able to locate any significant sources of gold mining information, Alabama. So to get to answer your question a long way around, I know I am not familiar with the history of gold mining in Mobile.
When I was a teenager, I stumbled on one by accident while I was hunting. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't see any tunneling, but it was on the side of a hill, and there were big concrete slabs coming down the hill. And it was about a year later, I read an article in the paper, and I realized that that's what it was. So I went back and tried to do a little panning, and with a lot of panning, I may have gotten a thimbleful of gold, about the consistency of sand. But apparently it was an operation that was worthwhile, because there had been machinery on these concrete slabs coming down to the creek.
Right, sort of a step-by-step process. It's unfortunate that people did not record history, even folk history. I mean, we have stories that have circulated, but you would think that would have been recorded in some way. But if you go back and read geological surveys and read anything that's out there about gold mining, Robert Russell of the Russell family in Alexander City wrote an article in 1957 or 8 about gold mining before 1860, and he begins it with that same lament that it just is not to be understood why people didn't record information about that gold mining, and for that reason it's just about lost to history, and it was very significant, and I hope that people will have a little interest stirred and through my book, and that you may pursue some of that history yourself. But if you come across the history, then I would love to know some more of it. But I ran into this with my research, that so many people had similar experiences, as you recall, and people, as you recall, going into the mining and going in those holes, but very little substantial facts and record exists, and I struggled to find everything that I could to document it, because people often say, well, if there was any gold in Alabama, there probably wasn't anything much to it, as I haven't heard of it. But I appreciate your coming today, and it's been delightful to talk with you. And I hope that you will learn more about it, because I have really struggled to get a lot of information out there for people that have an interest.
Thank you all for coming.